am tired of this. Dad, is anyone in this company multilingual? Does anyone speak another language?
The son of a black cleaning lady made a huge claim. A rich Arab man laughed in his face. But the boy had a secret that changed everything, and the man's laughter turned to shock. "I know 9 languages," the boy said. His voice, though young, sounded very sure of itself. It was a strange sound in a fancy office like this one, with its huge glass walls and shiny black marble floors. A rich man, a powerful Arab businessman, let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Ha! 9 languages? You can barely speak English without a street accent. Do you really expect me to believe something so silly?" Hassan al-Mansouri's laugh filled the quiet room. Sounding like a wild animal playing with its food, this 48-year-old guy had built a business worth $3.5 billion all by himself. He had come from a simple background and clawed his way to the top, so he thought he knew everything about hard work and worth. He thought this 14-year-old kid from the Bronx was the most entertaining thing he'd seen all week. The boy, David Johnson, stood by his mom, Grace, holding his worn public school backpack. His cheeks were red with embarrassment, but he didn't look away from the businessman. David knew what guys like this saw. They saw the son of a black cleaning lady, a kid with an old backpack from a poor neighborhood. They saw a joke, not a person. And David was ready for that. His steady gaze was a silent warning that he wasn't someone to be messed with, even if Hassan was too blind to see it. The air in the room was so thick with tension that you could almost feel it, a silent battle of wills between the powerful man and the seemingly powerless boy. Grace Johnson's hands shook as she held her cleaning bucket. The plastic handle was digging into her hand. She felt shame and fear take over, knowing she had made a huge mistake bringing David here. "David, please say sorry to Mr. Al-Mansouri," she whispered. Her voice was full of the worry of someone who had learned to be quiet and obey, so she wouldn't lose her job. This job had been her lifeline for 5 years, a thin rope keeping her and her 2 kids afloat. She couldn't risk it for her son's wild story. No need to say sorry," Hassan said, enjoying the moment. He leaned forward on his fancy marble desk, a mean smile on his face. He found joy in seeing others nervous. "This is fun. I want to hear more of this made-up story. Tell me, Mr. Genius, what are these 9 languages you speak?" The disrespect in his voice filled the room, making it hard to breathe. David took a deep breath. He was very aware of the labels people like Hassan used: son of a cleaning lady, black, from the Bronx. He knew these labels were used to look down on him and act like he wasn't a real person. He looked the man in the eye and listed them, his voice clear and sharp: English, Spanish, French, German, Arabic, Mandarin, Russian, Italian, and Portuguese. He said each name with a calm, even rhythm, as if reciting a simple grocery list. The names of the languages sounded important and impressive, a direct challenge to Hassan's loud, empty words. A sudden, strange quiet filled the room. The clear, confident way David spoke, without any hesitation, made Hassan stop laughing for a second. The list wasn't just a bunch of names. It was delivered with a purpose. Hassan could tell by the way David said the words that this wasn't just a kid making things up. He grabbed a glass of water, his fingers fumbling a little, a tiny sign that he was feeling uneasy. He quickly got his act together, waving his hand as he went back to his huge marble desk. "Liar," Hassan said, his voice going back to its bossy tone. "Grace, your son has a serious imagination problem. Maybe you should take him to a therapist instead of bringing him here." He was trying to get his power back, to go back to the way things had always been. Grace lowered her head, accepting the familiar shame. For 5 years, she had cleaned this office, listened to rude comments, and accepted low pay because she needed the job to raise her 2 kids. But seeing her bright, strong David being made fun of like this hurt her more than any insult ever had. The shame was not her own, but for her son, and that pain was much deeper. It felt like a hot, sharp knife twisting in her heart. She wished she could just disappear, to be invisible like she usually was, so that her son wouldn't have to suffer. "It's okay, Mom," David said softly, touching her arm to comfort her. It was a touch that showed a strength Grace didn't know he had. Hassan watched them with a mean grin. He loved these moments when he was completely in charge, when he could remind people of how little they were in the world. He had built his company not just with smart business moves, but with a cruel plan that crushed anyone who dared to question him. "You know what I think, Grace?" he said, leaning back in his $15,000 leather chair, the soft material groaning under his weight. "I think your boy is just jealous of my employees' kids who go to expensive private schools with their tutors and their fancy cars. So he makes up these stories to feel special, to feel like he belongs." The words were meant to sting, to make David's dreams seem like silly kid stuff. But David stayed calm, his eyes steady. He stood tall, a small but brave figure in the huge room. "Sir," he interrupted, his voice cutting through Hassan's words with a surprising amount of pride. "Do you speak Arabic?" The sudden question made Hassan stop. The man frowned, truly surprised. "Of course I do. It's my language. It's my culture. Why would you ask me such a silly thing?" "Then you would understand," David said, his eyes meeting Hassan's, "if I said al-haqiqa, using a phrase that means the truth." He spoke the words slowly, giving them a weight that was impossible to ignore. The quiet that followed was total and loud. Hassan stared at David, trying to understand the perfect high-level Arabic he had just heard. This wasn't basic Arabic that a tourist might learn. It was complex and spoken with a perfect accent, showing a deep, real knowledge. Grace looked back and forth between her son and Hassan, her heart beating fast. She felt a big change in the air, a flip in who had the power, but she didn't understand what David had said. She only saw the color drain from Hassan's face, the mean smile gone, replaced by a confused look. Where did you learn that?" Hassan mumbled, his voice no longer loud, but a thin whisper. His mind raced, trying to find a way to explain this, to push this boy away. David finally smiled, a small, proud curve of his lips. It was the first time since he had come into that scary office. "At the public library, sir," he said simply. "They have free language programs every afternoon." The answer was so simple, so ordinary, that it only made Hassan more confused. He had expected to hear about a fancy tutor or a special school. A public library? He saw them as a sign of being poor and a place for people without money. The idea seemed ridiculous. He had not set foot in one in over 30 years and had no idea they offered these kinds of programs to anyone who walked in off the street. To him, the public library was a place of failure, not success. A strange new feeling stirred in Hassan's chest. It was a mix of surprise and something that felt a lot like respect. He immediately pushed it away, crushing the thought with the same force he used to crush his business rivals. "Anyone can memorize a phrase," Hassan said, trying to get his control back, his voice a little louder this time. "That doesn't mean you actually speak a language. It just means you're a good parrot." "You are right, sir," David agreed, with a calm that made Hassan feel even more uneasy. "That's why I brought this." David reached into his worn backpack, a move that seemed almost like a performance now, and pulled out a document that made Hassan's breath catch. It was an official fancy certificate of knowing many languages from a famous university. Next to each of the 9 languages David had listed was a grade showing he was very good at it, just as good as a professional translator. "That's a fake," Hassan sputtered, but his voice no longer sounded sure. He was trying to believe a lie he no longer believed himself. The paper felt heavy and real in his hands, not like a cheap fake. He looked at the school's seal and the clean official writing. Everything about it screamed real, and it scared him. He had never been so wrong about a person in his entire life, and the fact that a child had proven him wrong was even more shocking. But David wasn't done. He reached into his backpack again. "This," he said, pulling out another paper, "is my certificate from the advanced language program at the city library." He then gave him a third one. "And this is from the online translation class I finished last month." Hassan took the papers with shaking hands. They were all real, with official stamps and signatures from real places. The signatures weren't fakes. The dates showed a clear 3-year journey of learning, starting when David was just 11. This 14-year-old kid, the son of his cleaning lady, had learned as much as someone who went to college for a long time, all by using free places and classes. "How?" Hassan whispered, staring at the boy. He had always believed that success was about money and being born into the right family. This kid had just destroyed his whole belief system with a few pieces of paper. What Hassan didn't understand was that David had a secret even bigger than his languages, a secret he was still hiding. He had done all this not just to prove a point, but to set a trap. And that secret was about to break everything the businessman thought he knew about money, being smart, and what a person is really worth. Hassan, now desperate, looked at the certificates again, his eyes darting all over the pages, trying to find any sign of a fake. His proud attitude was completely gone, replaced by a cold, growing fear. The signatures were real, the stamps were official, the dates showed a clear journey of hard study for 3 years. Still, he mumbled to himself, anyone can take a few online classes. That doesn't prove anything. David looked at him with a strange calm, as if he knew exactly what Hassan would say. "You're right," David said. "It doesn't." He reached into his backpack one last time. He took out a small, smooth tablet and started a video chat. In seconds, the screen showed an Asian woman in a busy office, with a bookshelf full of thick books behind her. "Professor Chin," David said in perfect Mandarin, a language Hassan didn't know, but he could tell by the way David spoke that it was real. "Could you please tell Mr. Al-Mansuri about how I did in your business translation class?" The woman on the screen replied in quick, fluent Mandarin. The sound of their easy talk filled the room, sounding so natural it was like a song. She spoke with a quick, professional pace that showed her expertise. Even though he couldn't understand a single word, Hassan was completely focused on the screen. He could hear how natural the talk was, the complex sentences, and how easily David moved between different ways of speaking. It sounded like two smart people talking, not a teacher and a student. The professor's face was full of pride. After a few minutes of talking, she switched to English, speaking right to Hassan. "Mr. Al-Mansuri, I have to tell you, David has been my best student in 15 years of teaching. At 14, he speaks Mandarin as well as someone who grew up in Beijing. He is truly special." The word special hung in the quiet office. Hassan's hands shook as he quickly ended the call, his mind spinning. He was losing all control, and it was a feeling he hadn't had in many years. "Grace," he said, his voice now weak and unsure. "Did you know any of this?" Grace shook her head in shock, still trying to understand what was happening. Her face showed a mix of surprise and a growing sense of wonder. "David has always been smart, sir," she said, "but I had no idea he was doing all this." The pride in her voice was stronger than any fear she had. Her eyes, once full of worry, now shone with a clear, happy light. 3 years, David said quietly, his voice a comfort to his mom's worry. "I started when I was 11. My mom was working 2 jobs so I could go to private school, but she lost her second job because of the pandemic. When I went back to public school, the classes were too easy. I decided to use my extra time for something helpful instead of just playing video games." Hassan felt a tight knot in his stomach, a feeling of shame and self-disgust. He thought of his own kids who went to the most expensive schools in New York and had tutors paid by the hour to teach them things they didn't care about. They had achieved nothing close to this. This boy, the son of a cleaning lady, had done more than them, with nothing but the public library and his own hard work. The idea that money was the only way to be successful was falling apart for him. "But why languages?" Hassan asked, for the first time truly curious. It was a question that showed he was giving up on his old ideas. "Because I wanted to understand the world," David replied, his answer simple, deep, and a hard truth for Hassan. "And I learned that when you talk to people in their own language, they stop seeing you as a stranger and start seeing you as a person." That idea hit Hassan hard. For years, he had used being from an Arab country as an excuse to keep his distance from his American employees, saying it was about cultural differences. But the real reason was just his own pride. He had built walls of language and social class to keep himself separate and feeling better than everyone else. This kid had just shown him how fake he was with a single, elegant sentence. "David," Hassan said slowly, his voice now full of respect, "you are 14 years old. What you have done is impossible." David smiled, a warm, real smile. "Impossible," he said, "is just something possible that hasn't happened yet." Hassan turned and looked at Grace, truly seeing her for the first time in 5 years. He saw a strong woman who had raised a genius while doing a low-paying job, a woman who had given up everything to give her son chances he wasn't supposed to have. He saw her pride, her strength, and her amazing love. It was a much more impressive sight than any art hanging on his walls, a real work of art made from a life of hard work and love. He felt his own pride crumble under the weight of this new understanding. "David," Hassan said, his voice now soft in a way Grace had never heard. "Why did you come here today? Your mom could lose her job for this." The words were no longer a threat, but a real question, an attempt to understand why this amazing young man had come. David and Grace looked at each other, a silent message passing between them. Grace gave a small nod, giving him permission to speak. "Because I overheard you on the phone yesterday," David said calmly. "You were talking about a business deal with investors from the Middle East. You made a few mistakes that could cost you millions." Hassan's face turned white, his mind instantly remembering the phone call. He had thought the connection was bad, or the investors were just confused. He hadn't thought to ask his Arabic-speaking staff because he believed his own knowledge was perfect. "What kind of mistakes?" he whispered, his heart pounding. David's explanation was calm and exact, spoken with the confidence of an expert. "You used a word for urgency when you should have used a word for immediacy, and you mixed up two words that sound alike when talking about deadlines. Small mistakes to you, but they completely change what you meant." Hassan sat down heavily, the memory of the investors' confused faces coming back to him. His language mistakes had almost ruined a $50 million deal, and he hadn't even known it. "How did you know I was making mistakes?" Hassan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I've been studying business Arabic for 2 years, David said. "It's what I'm best at." Hassan now looked at the boy with a deep respect. This kid, a public school student, was an expert in international business at 14. He had been working in the background, fixing Hassan's mistakes without him even knowing it. "You saved my business without me knowing it," Hassan said, feeling a huge debt to the boy. "Actually," David said, his hand going to his backpack again, "I did more than that." He pulled out another document and handed it to the stunned businessman. It was a detailed plan for how to fix the company's international communication. It pointed out the language errors that had cost them deals and gave specific ways to fix them. The document was an amazing piece of work, showing a deep knowledge of both language and business. "You looked at my company?" Hassan whispered, his voice shaking. "Only what you made public," David explained. "Press releases, videos, online papers. I found patterns of mistakes that explain why you lost business and gave you ways to fix them. I also found out about the money you lost because of them." This wasn't just a report. It was a map to a treasure he had not even known he had lost. Hassan read the paper twice, his eyes scanning every page, every idea, every detail. It was brilliant, careful, and worth hundreds of millions in future deals. It wasn't just a language report. It was a business plan that could change his whole company. He felt a deep sense of humbleness, something he had never felt before. "Why did you do this?" he asked, confused. "Because," David said, his voice softer now, "I wanted to show you that a person's worth isn't about their parents' money. It's about what they can give, what they can build, what they can offer the world. You judge me for the wrong things." Something big broke inside Hassan, a belief he had held his whole life. He had always thought that being successful was a right for the rich, that being smart was something you were born with. This kid had just destroyed that idea, not with anger, but with hard work and pride. "Hassan al-Mansouri," David said, using his full name for the first time. "Can I ask you a question?" Hassan nodded, his mind still spinning. "If a kid like me can do this using public libraries, what could other young people like me do with the same chances your kids have?" The question hung in the air, a huge statement about the very system Hassan had done well in. Hassan was still thinking about the question when David pulled one last thing from his backpack, a small recorder that made the rich man's blood run cold. "Before I answer your question," David said calmly, his eyes steady on Hassan's terrified face, "I need to show you something." He pressed a button on the recorder, and Hassan's own voice filled the office, a mean and hateful tone he had used just last week. The words were like a bitter poison in the air. "These black Americans are all the same, lazy, uneducated, always blaming others for their failures. That's why I only hire Arabs and whites for important jobs. They are the only ones I can trust to be ambitious and smart enough to succeed." Grace gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror, her eyes full of tears. Hassan's face turned completely white. His world was falling apart piece by piece. Where did you record this? Hassan mumbled, his voice raw with fear. In the elevator last week, David said without feeling. You were talking to your vice president about hiring. You didn't notice I was there. I was invisible to you, just like my mother. Hassan remembered the talk perfectly. He had been with his vice president, arguing about why they hadn't promoted any black employees to high-level jobs. He thought they were alone, and the elevator was a perfect place for his bad opinions. That's illegal, he yelled, his voice panicked. You can't record private talks. New York is a state where you only need one person to agree to a recording, David replied calmly. It's completely legal, and since it proves a pattern of racial discrimination, I'm sure the Department of Labor would be very interested. So would the news. David's legal knowledge was just as sharp as his language skills. Hassan felt the room begin to spin. A recording like this could destroy his company, lead to lawsuits for millions of dollars, and ruin his name forever. It was a public nightmare, a legal trap, and a moral disaster, all wrapped up in a tiny digital file. He was completely trapped, a man of great power brought to his knees by a child he had just a few minutes ago called nothing. What do you want? Hassan whispered, his voice completely defeated. David smiled, but it wasn't a childish smile. It was the smile of a chess player who had planned every single move of this game. I want you to make a choice, David said, walking over to Hassan's desk. You can keep believing that people like me and my mother are not as good as you, that my worth is tied to my skin color and where I live. If you do, this recording will end up on the desk of every journalist and lawyer in New York within the hour. Hassan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knew David wasn't joking. The serious look in his eyes was real, and his own fear was a terrible, cold weight in his stomach. He was facing a smarter opponent, and he knew it. Or, David continued, his voice softer but just as firm, you can prove that you truly learned something today. You can choose to be part of the solution, not the problem. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I want 3 things. First, I want you to make my mother the facility supervisor with a salary of $80,000 a year, with full health insurance and a retirement plan. She has earned it with years of loyalty and hard work. Hassan's eyes went to Grace, who was now standing taller than he had ever seen her. The look in her eyes was one of fierce, strong pride. Second, David continued, I want you to start a scholarship program for young people from poor neighborhoods, paid for with a big part of your company's profits. This program will be called the David Johnson Young Talent Program and will be managed by my mother. Grace's mouth dropped open in shock. And third, I want you to hire me as a junior language consultant. My job will be to check international contracts and help with language problems. You're 14, Hassan complained, holding on to the only thing he could still argue about. And I know 9 languages better than any adult you know, David replied, his voice full of controlled passion. Besides, I've already proved I can save your company millions, not just in business, but in its reputation. You have a choice, Mr. Al-Mansouri, and the clock is ticking. Hassan looked at Grace, who stood with her head held high, her eyes shining with a pride he had never noticed before. The woman he had seen as a humble worker for 5 years was now a strong leader, a sign of her son's will. Grace, he said, his voice full of a new humbleness, you have raised a genius. I have raised a man, Grace corrected him, her voice strong and steady. A man who knows his own worth and won't let anyone treat him as less than he is. David pulled out a single, neatly folded document from his backpack. I've already prepared the terms, he said. This is a legal contract. You have 5 minutes to decide before this recording goes public. He placed the paper on the marble desk. Hassan took it with shaking hands. It was professional, detailed, and had strong rules to protect both David and Grace from future harm. The boy had thought of everything. The legal language was perfect, a legal document worthy of the most expensive law firm. Hassan's mind was racing. He had always been a man who made quick decisions, a person who looked at risks and rewards with no mercy. Now, the choice was clear. He could hold on to his pride, his mean ideas, and his crumbling worldview, and watch his company burn. Or he could sign the contract and admit that everything he had ever believed about being successful was wrong. He had to know if this kid was playing a bigger game. How do I know you won't release the recording anyway? Hassan asked, his voice full of a desperate plea. Because unlike you, David said, looking him in the eye, I believe in giving second chances to people who truly want to change. If you sign this contract, you will prove that you want to change. Hassan looked at the demands. They were fair, even small, considering how much David could help the company. They weren't meant to ruin him, but to fix him. But signing still meant he was admitting he was wrong about everything. What if I don't sign? Hassan asked, even though he already knew the answer. David took out his cell phone, the small screen, a light of coming doom. This recording will go to the New York Times, CNN, and the Attorney General's office in exactly 3 minutes and 40 seconds. You're blackmailing me, Hassan said, his mouth tasting bitter. I'm offering you justice, David corrected him, his voice firm and strong. You've spent years getting benefits from a system that isn't fair. Now you have a chance to be part of the solution. You have the chance to make up for a lifetime of bad beliefs. Hassan looked out the window at the big, beautiful city he had won over with a mix of being smart and being mean. For decades, he had thought he was at the very top, the smartest person in any room. But this kid, a 14-year-old from the Bronx, had just beaten him at his own game. He had shown him a better kind of intelligence, a bigger vision, and more courage than Hassan had ever had. He was completely defeated, but in that defeat, he felt a strange, freeing sense of relief. The heavy weight of his own pride was finally lifted. Grace, Hassan said softly, his voice full of humbleness, do you accept the promotion? Grace looked at David, who gave a small, encouraging nod. Her eyes, which had held so much pain and fear for so long, were now filled with a new light. I accept, sir, she said, her voice firm and clear. Hassan picked up a solid gold pen, his hands still shaking a little, and signed the contract with a flourish. David Johnson, Hassan said, looking at the boy's calm, confident face. You have just taught me the most expensive and most important lesson of my life. What lesson? David asked. That being truly smart isn't about where you were born or how much money you have, Hassan replied, the words a difficult but needed confession. It's about what you do with the chances you create for yourself. David put away the recorder and held out his hand to Hassan. Welcome to the 21st century, Mr. Al-Mansouri. As Hassan shook the boy's hand, he felt he was signing a much bigger deal than a simple job contract. He was agreeing to see the world with new eyes, to get rid of the mean beliefs he had built up over a lifetime. He was accepting a new path, a new purpose. Then David did something unexpected. He pulled 2 more recorders from his backpack. Just so you know, he said casually, everything that happened here today was also recorded, including you signing this contract on your own. For the first time, Hassan laughed, not with meanness, but with real admiration. You are unbelievably smart, kid. No, David smiled. I just prepared better. This whole thing was a test, and you passed. 6 months later, Hassan al-Mansouri was sitting at a round table in the Bronx Public Library, surrounded by young people from poor neighborhoods who were now in the scholarship program David had demanded. The man who once saw public libraries as a sign of being poor now saw them as true centers of great learning, full of talented people. Mr. Al-Mansouri, a 15-year-old Latina girl named Maria, asked, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Is it true that David got his first job at 14 by blackmailing you? Hassan laughed, a deep, real, happy sound that filled the room. It's true, he said, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. David, now 15 and officially the youngest language consultant in American business history, watched from his desk nearby, where he was checking international contracts worth millions. In just 6 months, his fixes and suggestions had brought in over $200 million in new business for the company, a huge return on investment. The company was now doing better than ever before, not just with money, but with its culture. Tell the whole story, Maria insisted, her voice full of a child's strong desire for the truth. Hassan looked at Grace, who was now wearing elegant business suits as the facility supervisor and had become one of the most respected leaders in the company. She was no longer invisible. She was a leader. She smiled, encouraging him to keep going. 6 months ago, Hassan began, his voice telling a story. I was a rich but sad man. I thought my money made me better than other people, that it was a shield against the world. Then David taught me that being truly smart has nothing to do with where you were born, but with what you do with the chances you create for yourself. But the students weren't happy with just this simple answer. But how did he know it would work? Asked Carlos, a 13-year-old boy who was now learning to code thanks to the new program. David looked up from his work, his eyes holding a secret knowledge. Because I looked up Mr. Al-Mansouri for months, he said. I found out that he grew up as a poor immigrant in Lebanon, came to the U.S. at 16 without speaking English very well, and built his company from nothing. He had forgotten his own story. Hassan nodded. David showed me that I had forgotten where I came from, that I had become exactly the kind of person who looked down on me when I was young. And now? Maria asked. Now our company is the most diverse in the industry, Grace replied proudly. We hire talented people based on what they can do, not on their last name or where they live. We look for a different kind of wealth. Hassan stood up and walked over to a wall that showed the certificates of the first 50 people in the David Johnson Young Talent Program, including Maria and Carlos. Do you know what the best thing I've ever found is? He asked. What is it? They asked all at once. That when you put money into talented people, no matter where they come from, they don't just grow. They make you grow too. They teach you to be a better person, to see the world with new eyes, to become a different kind of leader. David closed his laptop and joined the group. Hassan al-Mansouri had every chance in the world, he said quietly. But he almost wasted the most important one of all, the chance to be a good person. Carlos looked at David with new respect. Weren't you scared of failing? He asked. Of course I was, David admitted. But my mom taught me that the biggest failure is letting someone treat you as less than you are worth. I'd rather risk everything than stay invisible. Hassan looked at David with a deep sense of respect. The most impressive thing wasn't that he knew 9 languages or looked at my company, he said. It was that he had the courage to stand up to a powerful man, knowing it could ruin his family's life. But you had a plan, right? Maria insisted. David smiled. Always have a plan, and always have proof to back up your position. Don't let people just guess what you're worth. Grace stood up, a sense of quiet power in the way she stood. It's time to go, David. We have a meeting with Japanese investors in an hour. As they walked to the company car, a Mercedes that Grace now drove as an executive, Hassan had a moment of quiet thought. David, he said, I have something to admit. What is it? David asked. You didn't just save my company, Hassan said, his voice full of emotion. You saved my soul. I was becoming a monster, rich and powerful, but totally empty inside. You made me remember that real success is when you use your power to help others, not to put them down. I am forever grateful. Grace kissed her son's forehead. I'm proud of you, baby. Not for the money or being famous, but for the man you're becoming, Hassan added. And I'm honored to have learned from both of you that family isn't about blood. It's about people who make you want to be better.